The dinner plates clattered as I cleared another table, my feet aching after an 8-hour shift at Bella Vita. The familiar scent of garlic and marinara sauce clung to my uniform as I counted my tips, barely enough to cover this week's groceries. Elena, Rosa, my manager, called from the hostess station. "There's someone here asking for you." I looked up to see Vivian Hastings, my mother-in-law, standing at the entrance in her designer suit and pearls, looking thoroughly unimpressed by her surroundings. My heart sank. She never visited me at work unless she wanted something, and that something was never good. "Elena," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "We need to talk. Now." I glanced at Rosa, who nodded sympathetically. "Take your break, honey. I've got your tables." Vivian led me outside, her Louboutin heels clicking against the pavement. She didn't speak until we reached her Mercedes, parked deliberately far from the other cars in the lot. "I heard about your grandfather," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. "My condolences." I swallowed hard. Grandpa William had passed away last week, the only family member who had ever truly believed in me. His loss still felt raw, an open wound I wasn't ready to discuss, especially not with Vivienne. "Thank you," I said stiffly. "Is that why you're here?" "In a way." She opened the envelope, producing a document. "I understand he left you quite an inheritance." Of course, that's what this was about. Money, the only thing Vivian Hastings truly cared about. "I wouldn't know," I replied carefully. "The will reading isn't until next week." "Don't play coy with me," she snapped. "I had my lawyers look into it. That old farm of his, the one in Vermont, he left it to you, didn't he? Along with whatever fortune he'd been hoarding up there." I stayed silent. Grandpa's farm had been his pride and joy, though none of us understood why he moved there after retiring from his successful law practice in New York. The family had written him off as eccentric, choosing to live simply despite his wealth. But he'd been happy there, finding peace in the rolling hills and quiet solitude. "Elena," Vivian continued, her tone shifting to something almost gentle. "You have to understand, this inheritance, it should go to Lucas. He's your husband, the father of your child. He knows how to manage money, how to make it grow. She paused, looking me up and down. "Well, you're a waitress." The words stung, but I'd grown used to Vivian's disdain. Ever since Lucas and I met in college, me on scholarship, him from old money, she'd made it clear I wasn't good enough for her son. The fact that I'd chosen to keep working after having Ava, rather than staying home like a proper society wife, only fueled her contempt. "The reading is next week," I repeated. If Grandpa wanted Lucas to have his property, he would have left it to him. Vivian's face hardened. "This isn't about what your grandfather wanted. This is about what's best for the family, for Ava. Do you really think you can manage a property like that? Handle that kind of responsibility?" She thrust the document toward me. "Sign this. It's a simple transfer of inheritance rights. Everything goes to Lucas, clean and simple. I'll even throw in a generous stipend for you, say $5,000 a month. More than you make here, certainly." I took the paper, scanning its contents. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear. I would give up any claim to Grandpa's estate in exchange for monthly payments controlled by the Hastings family. "And if I don't sign?" Vivian's smile turned cold. "Then things might become difficult. Lucas's position at the firm, your daughter's acceptance to Kingsley Academy, these things require certain connections, certain understandings. It would be a shame if those arrangements were disrupted." My hands trembled as I held the document. She was threatening my family, using my husband's career and my daughter's future as leverage. It was cruel, calculated, and exactly what I'd expect from Vivian Hastings. But there was something she didn't know. Something Grandpa had told me during our last conversation, just days before he died. "Do you have a pen?" I asked quietly. Vivian's smile widened as she produced an expensive fountain pen from her purse. "I knew you'd be reasonable about this." I signed my name on the dotted line, my signature steady despite my racing heart. Vivian snatched the paper back, tucking it safely into her envelope. "Well done," she said, patting my arm condescendingly. "I'll have my lawyers file this right away. Don't worry about the will reading. We'll handle everything." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Vivian, there's something you should know about Grandpa's farm." She paused, looking back with raised eyebrows. "The inheritance," I said softly. "It's not what you think." She waved dismissively. Whatever it is, I'm sure Lucas will manage it better than you could have. Get back to work, dear. Those tables won't clear themselves. I watched her drive away, the Mercedes gleaming in the afternoon sun. Let her think she'd won. Let her file that paper and celebrate her victory. Because what Vivian Hastings didn't know was that Grandpa's last secret was about to change everything. And this time, her money and connections wouldn't be able to stop what was coming. The week before the will reading crawled by. Lucas noticed something was off, but I blamed it on grief. In truth, I was waiting, my stomach in knots every time the phone rang. Finally, 3 days after I signed Vivian's document, it happened. Mrs. Hastings. The caller's voice was professional, clipped. This is Thomas Chen from the Environmental Protection Agency. We need to discuss the property you recently acquired in Vermont. I smiled, remembering Grandpa's last words to me. The farm isn't just land, Elena. It's a responsibility. One that some people aren't prepared to handle. Actually, I replied, you'll want to speak with my mother-in-law, Vivian Hastings. She's the one handling the property now. There was a pause. I see. And she's aware of the situation. I don't believe so, but I'm sure she'll be very interested to learn about it. The next morning, Vivian burst into Bella Vita during the breakfast rush, her face flushed with rage. What did you do? She demanded, grabbing my arm as I carried a tray of coffee. Careful, I warned, steadying the cups. You wouldn't want to cause a scene in public, would you? Her grip tightened, but she lowered her voice. The EPA called. Something about contaminated soil, groundwater testing, cleanup costs in the millions. What are you telling me? I carefully set down my tray and faced her. You wanted the inheritance. Now it's yours. All of it. This is fraud, she hissed. You knew about this when you signed. No fraud at all. Grandpa's farm sits on land that was used as an industrial dump site in the 1950s. He bought it knowing that, spent years working with environmental lawyers to document the damage. He was building a case. Vivian's face paled. A case. Against Hastings Chemical Corporation, your family's company, the one that dumped toxic waste there for decades before selling the land. Grandpa traced it all back, every barrel, every document. He was just waiting for the right moment to file the lawsuit. You're lying, she whispered, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The EPA has everything, soil samples, water tests, internal memos. Grandpa made sure of that before he died. He knew someone would try to take it from me, try to bury the evidence. So he made it impossible to hide. Vivian sank into a nearby booth, her legs giving out. This will ruin us. The cleanup costs alone. About $40 million, according to the initial estimates, plus whoever fines the EPA imposes. And that's before the civil suits from local residents start rolling in. You played us, she whispered. No, Vivian, you played yourself. Lucas will never forgive you for this, Vivian hissed, her voice shaking with fury. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Actually, he already knows. I told him everything last night, about your threats, the document, all of it. He's with our lawyer right now, figuring out how to protect our assets before the EPA findings go public. Vivian's mask of control finally cracked. Her perfectly lined eyes widened, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. The Hastings family empire, built on wealth and reputation, was on the verge of collapse, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I have tables to get back to, I said simply, adjusting my apron. You should probably call your lawyers. I hear the EPA has a lot to discuss with you. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within days, local news stations picked up the story. Hastings Chemical Corp faces massive environmental lawsuit. The EPA's report became public record, detailing years of illegal dumping that had poisoned groundwater across the region. Hastings Chemical's stock plummeted. Vivian's social circle, the same people who had once fawned over her at charity galas, now avoided her like the plague. Investors pulled out, lawsuits piled up, and the once golden Hastings name became synonymous with scandal and corruption. But the biggest shock came from Lucas. Did you know? He asked one night after Ava had fallen asleep. We sat together on our tiny balcony, a bottle of wine between us, the city lights flickering in the distance. Grandpa told me everything, I admitted. He knew your mother would try to take the inheritance. He spent years gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. Lucas exhaled, rubbing his face. So this was his plan all along. Not just his plan, his justice. The families in that town have been suffering for decades. Cancer clusters, birth defects, people losing their homes because their land is worthless now. Grandpa spent his retirement uncovering the truth, and he knew the only way to bring it to light was to let someone like your mother try to take what wasn't hers. Lucas was silent for a long time, staring at the wine glass in his hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but resolute. Then we make sure his work wasn't for nothing. The investigation expanded. More sites were uncovered, more victims came forward. Former Hastings Chemical employees admitted to years of secret disposal operations, falsified reports, and hush money paid to keep inspectors away. The Hastings empire wasn't just falling, it was imploding. Vivian fought tooth and nail to hold on to her power. She tried to shift blame, offered settlements, even attempted to claim I had coerced her into signing the transfer papers. But the evidence was airtight. Grandpa had made sure of that. 6 months after the scandal broke, I received an unexpected letter from her lawyer. She wanted to meet. I found her in a rented townhouse on the outskirts of town. The Grand Hastings estate had been sold to cover legal fees. The sleek Mercedes was gone, replaced by a modest sedan. For the first time, Vivian Hastings looked ordinary. "I underestimated you," she said as soon as I sat down. Her voice lacked its usual sharpness, the arrogance stripped away. "You and your grandfather both. You underestimated a lot of people," I replied. "The families your company hurt, the people you thought were beneath you. You thought money made you untouchable." She let out a bitter laugh. "And now, we have nothing. The company is bankrupt. Our assets are frozen. Even Lucas's trust fund is tied up in cleanup costs." "You still have family," I said, glancing toward the framed photo of Lucas and Ava on the mantel. "If you learn to value them more than money and status." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Is that why you're here? To gloat? To offer forgiveness?" "No," I said, standing. "I'm here because Ava asked about her grandmother. She misses you. That's more than you deserve, but she has a bigger heart than either of us." Vivian blinked rapidly, her hands tightening around the armrests of her chair. "I'd like to see her, if you'll allow it." "That depends," I said, "on whether you can finally see people for who they are, not what they own." Ava doesn't care about designer clothes or fancy cars. She just wants her grandmother to love her. Think about that. As I walked out, I caught my reflection in the window, still in my Bella Vita uniform, heading to another shift. But for the first time, I felt proud of it. I didn't need to prove myself to people like Vivian anymore. I knew who I was. The cleanup of Grandpa's farm would take years. The EPA estimated the cost would surpass $100 million. The Hastings fortune, once a symbol of privilege, was now being used to repair the damage they had caused. Lucas and I stayed in our small apartment. He found work at a law firm that specialized in environmental justice. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. And Viviana? She started changing. Slowly, it began with small things, showing up for Ava's school events, asking how my day was, listening instead of dictating. She got a job as a receptionist, her first real work in decades. Humility didn't come naturally to her, but it came. 1 year after it all fell apart, we visited Grandpa's farm. The cleanup crews were hard at work, but the land, scared as it was, felt alive again. Ava ran through the fields that would one day be clean, her laughter carrying on the wind. Lucas took my hand. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. "Not just of what you did, but of what you're rebuilding." I thought about Grandpa's last letter to me, written in shaky handwriting just days before he passed. "Sometimes justice doesn't come through revenge, Sophie. Sometimes it comes from forcing people to face the truth they spent their lives avoiding." That night, we had dinner at Bella Vita. Vivienne joined us. She didn't complain about the plastic cups or the crowded tables. Instead, she listened as Ava talked about school, asked Lucas about his new job, and even thanked the waitress by name. It wasn't forgiveness. Some wounds run too deep for that. But it was something else. And for the first time, that was enough.